Okay, so it's obvious that when we ask the question, why an African Center for Epistemology and Philosophy of Science, there are different interpretations of what that question is asking. So, for example, we heard from Alex, why the need for such a center, which is the one version of the question. Another way of looking at the question is, why the Africanness of the center? And this was something that we spoke a lot about in the build-up to this event and the setting up of the center. I think the way to answer the second question is to look at what ultimately the role of the center is going to be in the decolonization of knowledge in Africa. And ultimately the judge or the judges of the success or failure of the center in terms of that goal are not going to be the people in this room, but the people in the lecture venues, right? Because ultimately they are going to inherit the center. And so the center's success in terms of decolonizing knowledge is going to be judged by those people. People like my second year class, who I've been teaching African philosophy to, and where we've looked at the relationships between things like African traditional beliefs and what we can refer to as scientific rationality. So some of the questions Dimpo brought up. So again, the question I want to pose to ACEPS is, what ultimately is our role in decolonizing knowledge, especially against the background of what was spoken about before, namely the isolation, the compartmentalization, and the marginalization of indigenous knowledge systems. Now, if you read the language in the center's missions, value statements, etc., it speaks about the need to walk a fine balance. Okay, so on the one hand, as an agent of decolonization, we have to allow indigenous knowledge systems and other knowledge systems that have been suppressed a less peripheral role in society. On the other hand, we have this other set of commitments and values to mainstream traditional Western epistemology and philosophy of science. For example, we say that a big part of the role of an ACEPS center is to decide questions around how knowledge gets assessed. Right. So what that implies is that our job as a center is going to be to consider indigenous knowledge systems in the sense that we have the tools with which to assess the type of knowledge claims that emerge from those indigenous knowledge systems. Now, if that is what we envision the role of ACEPS to be, then I think we run the danger of being seen to say a similar thing to what the Western Cape Premier said recently when she said, while there are negatives to decolonization, there were also positives, right? So if our view is, let's keep what works, let's keep the things we know from mainstream Western epistemology and philosophy of science to work, to produce results, and use those as the yardsticks with which to judge indigenous knowledge systems, then I think we run the risk of lapsing into the view that was expressed by the Western Cape Premier. So in order to avoid that, what I suggest is that we look at a different model of how we reconcile indigenous knowledge systems with scientific rationality. We look at more of a model where we attempt to assimilate the two, and obviously, anytime you get assimilation, you have to have compromise. And so my question to the panel today and to the room today is, to what extent does a center like ACEPS have to compromise its, let's call them core values for lack of another term? What sort of core values is ACEPS willing to compromise in order to allow indigenous knowledge systems to move away from the margins and to become, more centralized in terms of knowledge production in South Africa? And that's the provocation or the question I want to leave with you today.